Well, we're talking about discovering who you really are and finding your lane. Last week we talked about identifying your governing values, and I hope you've taken the time to download the PDF and to go through the exercise of really whittling down to your top maybe 5 or 10 values. And I will tell you from my experience, that's not an easy task to accomplish because you begin to really weigh what's really important. So I really appreciate your diligence in doing that. And if you have to continue on with that exercise another week or two to get that whittled down, that's fine. In this episode, I want to talk about your passions. And I'm not talking about passions for the opposite sex. That's fine too. But I want to talk about what are the things that when you talk about them, when you are doing them, you're engaged with them, you get super excited. It energizes you. You can be physically exhausted, but when you enter into a conversation about that one thing or those couple of things, you come alive and you feel the energy and the passion come alive in you. Those are passions. And you see, those are very clear indicators to me of what your purpose is, what your lane is, because I really don't believe that God would put in our hearts desires and passions that were not related to the very thing He put us here to do. I want to give you an example of this from my own life, if you'll allow me to. When I was a very young child, probably 2, 3 years old, I became extremely aware of these massive machines that were flying through the air, called airplanes. And I lived in Houston, Texas, and we were on the approach side of Hobby Airport, and every single day, dozens and dozens of aircraft would fly right over the top of my home, and they would be no more than 300 or 400 feet above the ground as they were coming into land. And I would go up in my little tree house or sit out in the yard or lay out on my back in the yard and watch for hours as these planes would, and I was infatuated with, man, how do these things fly? A young kid, my dad recognized this passion in me, and he got me a couple of little books to begin to read. And my dad used to be a pilot years before that, and so after a while he gave me an old textbook, an actual flight manual for those students who were getting their pilot's licenses. And I was a young kid, maybe 5, 6 years old, and I read that book all the way through. I began to understand the principles of flight, the forces that are at work as an airplane lifts into the air. I began to look at the instrumentation and the engines and all the dynamics of navigation. And as a young child, this thing was alive in me. My dad began to take me to air shows, and I began to climb up in these aircraft and just dream and envision the day when I'd be able to fly an airplane. Well, I graduated high school and moved on in my adult life, and at 22 years old I got married, and that thing was still alive in me. And one day it just clicked, I'm going to go get my pilot's license. And I got my pilot's license, not to become a commercial airline pilot, not to go into the Air Force to fly for the military. All those things would have been an honor to do. But I just wanted to go fulfill this passion. The very first time I ever flew an airplane, I was in the left seat, had an instructor in the right seat. Very first time. Now remember, very first time I physically flew an airplane. For years, this passion had driven me to imagine and to dream. I'd flown that airplane 1,000 times in my mind. And that day we took off, we flew out to a practice area, did a few maneuvers, and came back into the airport. And the instructor was supposed to land the airplane, but as we approached the airport and came in on our final approach, I noticed that he wasn't taking over the controls. I was adjusting the power, I was nosing down the airplane, and as we came into land, I expected at any moment he was going to take the controls and land the plane. But no, he just talked me through it, and I landed that plane so smoothly, not one single bounce. And he looked at me and he said to me, he said, Brian, come on man, you're joshing me. You absolutely have flown before. I said, no sir, I've never flown an airplane before. And he said to me, he said, well obviously this is something that's in your heart to do because I've never allowed anybody to land an airplane their first time up. Well, I'm not telling you that to be braggadocious about my piloting skills, but now years later I have a commercial pilot's license. I fly multi-engine airplanes. I have an instrument rating. I have had significant time in turbine aircraft. And I'm saying all that to say, my passion that I had as a small child was an indicator of where I was going in my life. I don't fly for the airlines, but for my ministry and for the work that I do, I get to fly myself all over the country doing what I love to do. You see, don't discount those things that you enjoy. Don't discount those things that make you super excited, because those things many times are indicators of the lane God's trying to get you in. My name is Brian Holmes, and I hope this has been a blessing to you. May God richly bless you and increase you in every place in your life. Until next time, God bless.